Book title: Aishvarya the Cult. Author's name: M. Aishvarya. Book company: Blue Hills Publications. Chapter title: The Eclipse, Volume B, Home Invasion. Note: the above manuscript is based on a chapter from the novel Aishvarya the Cult written by M. Aishvarya, going to be published by Blue Hills Publications. Copyright reserved by Blue Hills Publications. Title: The Eclipse, Volume B, Home Invasion. Author name: M. Aishvarya. Kavya got down from the school van. She entered her home, changed her clothes from uniform to casual and sat in front of the TV. She put the food plate on the floor and was watching TV while eating food. She finished eating the food, cleaned the floor and lay on the bed while watching TV. A newspaper boy was busy collecting bills from people. Kavya was still watching TV. The doorbell rang. She walked towards the door and looked through the magic eye fitted to the door. She saw the paper boy. She opened the door. The paper boy looked at the girl from foot to head. He handed over the bill. "Bringing the money," said Kavya, and entered the house. She came back with the money and handed it over to the newspaper boy and closed the door. The newspaper boy was walking away when he halted and looked at the door. Kavya was busy watching the serial. The paper boy knocked the door again. "Now what?" said Kavya. She did not want to miss watching the TV serial that was going on in the TV. She rushed to the door and opened it. Kavya opened the door. "Could I have a bottle of water?" asked the paper boy. The girl rushed into the house. She halted to see whatever was happening in the TV serial on the TV and ran to the kitchen to the refrigerator to collect the water bottle. The paper boy looked around and entered the house, locking the door from inside. Kavya came in a hurried manner from the kitchen, holding the water bottle. The girl halted in front of the TV to watch what was going on in the TV opera and then moved towards the door. While walking hurriedly, the girl hit something. She looked to her front and found she had collided with the paper boy. She looked at him with a puzzled expression. The paper boy looked at her with a sinister smile. The water bottle fell from her hand as she tried to release herself from the grip of the paper boy. The latter was forcing himself on Kavya. Both were fighting on the bed in front of the TV. The girl began to shout to raise an alarm while the fight was going on the bed. For a moment, she pushed the paper boy aside on the bed and tried to run. The paper boy caught hold of her leg, making her stumble headlong on the floor. The paper boy climbed down from the bed and took out a knife from his pocket and stabbed the girl on her leg. The girl screamed, holding the stabbed leg. Taking this as an opportunity, the paper boy stabbed the knife into the neck of the girl. All the screams were silenced. The girl lay on the floor, dead. The paper boy dragged the girl onto the bed. A little later, the paper boy left the room hurriedly. An hour later, a grown-up lady, who could be Kavya's mother, came to the door. She knocked the door but found the door open with her touch. "The door is not locked," wondered the lady. The lady entered the house to see what the matter was. She saw drops of blood on the floor and was terrified. She entered further into the house and was shocked to find the body of Kavya on the bed. The bed was soaked with blood. She covered the body of Kavya with a blanket. "Kavya, wake up, daughter. Tell me something. Kavya," said the lady, shaking the body of Kavya. There was no response from the girl. This was Mrs. Agasti, a school teacher. She had gone to school and just returned from office only to find this ghastly scene at home. Mrs. Agasti went out of the house and asked for help. The girl was taken to hospital. Mr. Agasti came back from office and found a gathering at his home. He walked through the crowd and found his wife weeping inconsolably near the body of his daughter. The next week, Mrs. and Mr. Agasti were sitting on the bed. The former rested her head on the shoulder of latter and wept. Both were holding the photo frame of their daughter and weeping in silence. What harm had a little flower done? Why did this happen? Mrs. Agasti kept asking while weeping. A certain night, there was a hermit in the room in front of the fire altar, busy in worship. Mrs. and Mr. Agasti were in a room. The couple sat cross-legged on the floor. "Master will be coming here. Wait," said an assistant. The hermit came and sat on the floor in front of the couple. "Tell me, son, what troubles you?" "We had a daughter. We lost her this month. Our daughter was murdered at home," said Mr. Agasti. "And you want to know why the tragedy befell your only child?" asked the hermit. "Yes, master," said the couple with their hands joined. "Bring your hand forward," said the hermit. Mr. Agasti took his right hand forward. The hermit held the palm of Mr. Agasti and closed his eyes for a moment. The hermit opened his eyes after a few moments and said, "Meet me on the day of the eclipse. I will tell you." The day of the eclipse. Mrs. and Mr. Agasti were in front of the hermit. "Whatever we face in the current birth does have a link with some other birth because the body keeps changing, although the essence lives on," the hermit began to explain. Mrs. and Mr. Agasti kept looking at the hermit in the way children look at a teacher. "You were once a hunter in another birth. You killed the fawn of a deer. A deer cannot talk. The mother of the fawn kept watching and held a grudge on you. You got the result of it in the current birth. You are experiencing what the mother of the fawn experienced back then," explained the hermit. At home, Mrs. Agasti laid a doll on the bed where Kavya used to rest. The lady covered the doll with a bedsheet and went to the bedroom. "Did you cover Kavya?" asked Mr. Agasti while working on the computer. "Yes, I covered her and said good night," replied Mrs. Agasti and lay on the bed. With Kavya gone, her mother kept the doll and called it by the name Kavya. Mrs. Agasti would take care of the doll as if it were a human girl. "The body keeps changing, the essence lives on," muttered Mrs. Agasti. Mr. Agasti looked at his wife. "What happened?" asked Mr. Agasti. "Repeating the line of the Bhagavad Gita," replied Mrs. Agasti. "That I know," remarked Mr. Agasti. "The body of my Kavya ended," Mrs. Agasti kept telling in a catatonic tone. Mr. Agasti kept looking at his wife. "Her essence must be roaming around. Maybe we can make an attempt to meet her," continued Mrs. Agasti. "Juhi, what are you telling? Have you lost it?" asked Mr. Agasti. "What wrong did I tell? My daughter must be around. I just need to connect with her," Mrs. Agasti argued back. "What are you talking? Even I miss Kavya. I do not talk anything like the way you are talking now," said Mr. Agasti. "I just want to be with my daughter. Get me my daughter," said Mrs. Agasti. Mr. Agasti stood up from the bed and said, "Have you gone mad? What are you talking?" "Get me my daughter! Get me my daughter!" said Mrs. Agasti repeatedly. Mr. Agasti sat close beside his wife and consoled her. A certain day, Mr. Agasti was in front of the hermit. Connecting with the essence of the departed, questioned the hermit. "My wife wanted to connect with the ghost of Kavya," said Mr. Agasti in grief. "What your wife wants is against the law of nature," responded the hermit. "Baba, do not tell us about what is with the rule of nature or against it. Just make us meet our daughter. Just make us meet Kavya," pleaded Mr. Agasti. The hermit looked at Mr. Agasti in a thoughtful way and said, "Can you do the task needed to connect with your daughter?" Mr. Agasti looked at the hermit with hope. In a building, a girl was looking at the mirror while getting dressed. "Delta!" came a loud call. "Going, ma'am," responded the girl. The girl limped to another room. In the room, a grown-up lady was seated on a chair. In front of her on two chairs were seated Mrs. and Mr. Agasti. "Namaste," greeted Delta to Mrs. and Mr. Agasti. "Delta, touch their feet," said the grown-up lady. Her name was Miss Ninma. The girl limped up to Mrs. and Mr. Agasti and touched their feet. The couple blessed the girl. "Mrs. and Mr. Agasti, this is Delta." Ninma introduced Delta to the couple. "Delta, meet Mrs. and Mr. Agasti. From now on, you will be their adopted daughter," said Miss Ninma. Mrs. Agasti held the hand of Delta. Tears welled up in her eyes. At home, Delta wore the dress which Kavya used to wear. Mrs. and Mr. Agasti took photographs with Delta. The couple would at times address Delta as Kavya. They kept the girl at home and told her to improve her skill instead of wasting time in the unproductive education, which was about reading for exams and then forgetting things completely. Delta would cook food, dance to music for videos in social media account, and watch TV when she wanted. "Do not open the door, no matter who it be, until you hear our voice," said Mrs. Agasti before leaving for office. At an unknown location. "We have the eclipse nearing, Master," said Mr. Agasti to the hermit. "Good," remarked the hermit. "Do what I tell." The eclipse. Mrs. and Mr. Agasti ate food with Delta. After eating food, Delta stood up and took the plates to the wash basin. "Delta, today I will clean the plates. You have rest," said Mrs. Agasti. Delta left the utensils and went to Kavya's room. Now it was her room. After a certain length of time, the couple checked her room. Mrs. Agasti found the girl was asleep. She signaled it to Mr. Agasti. The couple dragged the unconscious girl from the bed and lay her on the floor. The couple looked at the time on the clock. There was a knock on the door. Both opened the door. The assistant of the hermit entered the room. It was nearing midnight. The couple drew a circle on the floor and lit a ritual fire in the middle. Mrs. and Mr. Agasti, along with the assistant of the hermit, sat on the sides of the ritual fire, forming a triangle. The body of Delta lay close to the fire. "Close your eyes and utter whatever I do. You will get a feeling. You may not be able to explain, but you will feel it around. When you get the feeling, know that the entity of your daughter is near," instructed the assistant of the hermit. The ritual began. The couple kept muttering whatever the assistant said. The group kept chanting. "Halt!" instructed the assistant of the hermit. The couple halted chanting. "Try to feel," instructed the assistant. The couple had closed their eyes on instruction. "Do you feel anything?" asked the assistant. "I feel a certain energy nearby," replied Mr. Agasti. "Even I too," replied Mrs. Agasti. There was a ghost of Kavya outside the ring on the floor that was made around the couple and the assistant. The ghost was sitting on the floor and looking at them. The assistant opened his eyes and looked at the ghost. Mrs. and Mr. Agasti opened their eyes slowly. They were terrified to see the ghost. "It cannot do anything as long as you are in the circle," said the assistant. "Kavya!" called out Mrs. Agasti. The ghost kept giving a grin to the lady. "Go, take your offering," said the assistant. The ghost looked at the assistant and laughed. The body of Delta was lying on the floor, not too far away. The ghost of Kavya walked up to Delta. Kavya sat on the body of Delta. The ghost gave a loud laughter, then began to bite the neck of Delta. Mrs. and Mr. Agasti looked at the whole thing, horrified. A guest needs food on invitation. The ghost will need food of a different kind. The assistant described the activity of the ghost. The next day, Mrs. and Mr. Agasti looking at the image of Kavya on the wall. Mrs. Agasti was having tears in her eyes. "Calm down. You wanted to look at her Kavya. You got the chance." Mr. Agasti consoled Mrs. Agasti. "We will wait for the next eclipse to meet her," added Mr. Agasti. In another room, Delta lay asleep on the bed. A bite mark could be found on her neck. In a hostel room. And with that, the Agasti family could meet their dead daughter. Narrated Nisha. "What about the next meeting with the ghost?" asked Kusum. "I will tell that another day," replied Nisha. "Nice narration," remarked Kusum. 3 girls were sitting close to each other on a bed in a hostel. "I completed my narration. Now, who will be the next?" asked Nisha. The girls swirled the bottle kept on the bed in a circular motion. The bottle swirled and halted, pointing at Kusum. "Okay, Kusum, tell a story," said Malvika, the other girl in the room. "What will I tell?" said Kusum, thinking. There was a phone call. "Let me respond to the call," said Kusum, and left the bed. She responded to the phone call. "Hello, Ma," Kusum replied to the phone call. "Nothing, Ma, just having leisure time. After night meal, I was having a round of story narration with my friends," added the girl. Kusum was walking about the room while talking over the phone. "What are you talking about your friend's circle?" asked Kusum's mother. Kusum walked out of the room. "We were narrating horror stories," replied Kusum. "It is not good," said Kusum's mother. "It is not good to talk on ghosts late at night." The girl was walking about on the corridor while talking over the phone. "Arey Ma, do not worry. There is nothing called ghost in reality," said Kusum. "We are just having a storytelling time. Right now, it is my turn to tell a ghost story." Nisha completed her turn by telling the story of a girl named Kavya. How the girl got killed and then how her family connected with a ghost, added Kusum. "But do not tell too much of ghost stories at this late hour of the night," said the mother. "No, Ma, do not worry. Nothing will happen," assured Kusum. "And how are your lessons going on?" asked her mother. "They are fine. You remember once I mentioned about Nisha, our hostel mate?" "Yes." "The girl is very helpful. She is helping me read well." Now the girl was back in the room. "Do not roam about with hostel mates. You keep away from every diversion. You just read and clear the entrance." "Do not worry, Ma. My hostel mates are very helpful," The girl kept talking with her mother over the phone. Unknown to Kusum, Kavya was standing at a corner of the room gazing at her. Kusum ended the talk over the phone and sat with the girls on the bed. "It is your turn to narrate a ghost story, Kusum," said Malvika. I know, said Kusum. "Nothing new is coming to my mind. Let me narrate my ghost story as a continuation of where Nisha ended." "Tell," said Nisha. "The ghost of Kavya was called by her family on another eclipse." Kusum began her narration. Nisha and Malvika listened to her. The ghost of Kavya kept looking at them from the corner of the room. About the author, M. Aishvarya, fondly called Maverick Aishvarya by his friends, is a prolific writer. He is currently working as a manuscript writer for movie making.